Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger and helping people who are scared of things. And this time it's about people who are scared of the anniversary of the killing of General Soleimani, the Iranian general, by Trump. So, first of all, the US is not building up to attack on Iran. They've sent their B-52 bombers over there just to show their presence. They're gone from the area again. The Nimitz aircraft carrier, that's basically a mobile aerodrome, an aircraft carrier, and it's with fighters on it, with a very short, they can take off very quickly, sometimes even do vertical takeoff and vertical landing, or they land with a kind of a cable that lets them to stop very quickly on a short runway. And basically it's a runway at sea. Anyway, that's on its way back home, and so it's definitely not preparing for an attack on Iran. No way. Not even the slightest sign of that. And it would make no sense for Trump to attack Iran. So I get people saying, oh, but Trump wants to stay in power, so he's going to attack Iran. Well, he's often said that he's not going to start any major wars. And some people say, oh, but if you start a war, then it's vote winning. There's actually no evidence of that if you look at the history of votes. But anyway, the election is over, and there's no way it's going to make any difference to Trump to have a war. And it's not going to help with the Senate election in 6 days for sure. Can't imagine that going down well. And then if you're just thinking, oh, Trump's not a very good general, as it were, that he's not got, maybe think his military thinking isn't too sound, well, luckily, presidents do not order soldiers directly. That's the job of the generals. It's never the job of a president. You don't need to worry about how sound the military thinking is of a president. The president will say to a general, I want to do X, and the general will say, please prepare some scenarios. Or the general will say, this has just happened. What are your plans, President? Here's some possible scenarios. The president does not work out a military campaign. That would never happen. Because a president is not trained as a general. You just wouldn't have a clue. And then a general will be very careful, and there always has to be a military objective, and it has to have not have unacceptable risk to civilians. So the very fact that you worry about what they might do, well, the general would have the same concerns. He doesn't want to cause any harm to civilians, or he wants to minimize the harm, so it is proportional for the objective. Indeed, the 4 principles of armed warfare, kind of legal principles, international law, then it's very important. It would indeed be a war crime to engage some military action that causes vast numbers of civilian deaths, and we're much less tolerant of that than we were in World War II, for instance, never mind World War I, or indeed in the Vietnam War or the Korean War. Things happened back then that nowadays would be called a war crime, because we have moved forward in our thinking. So you can be sure tomorrow that the US soldiers, they will be very much kept safe in their compounds, well protected, and probably sitting underground in very well protected from any attacks. And then from the Iranian side, then certainly the Iranian government doesn't want to attack the US. Iran does not have the nuclear bomb, and we know that for certainty. The IAEA inspectors are in Iran, and they are there to verify that Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb. Iran has been enriching its uranium to the level of the 4% which is suitable for civilian fuel, it has just started to enrich some of it to 20%. That would take a long time to enrich a lot of it to 20%. And that is still well beyond the military grade of 90%. And then before they could even think about having a nuclear bomb and using it in attack, they would have to test it with underground tests. So we are a very long way away from Iran being able to launch a nuclear weapon. At least several months, probably longer than that. Think about how long it took for North Korea from their first test to the point at which they have significant military capabilities with nuclear weapons. And even then, they haven't, Iran doesn't have intercontinental ballistic missiles that could really hit the United States. They would be able to send a mock warhead. They can't do anything, and they haven't tested their nuclear bombs for re-entry. They just break apart, even if they have got them light enough to fit on an ICBM, because your first bomb that you make is too heavy anyway. So it's a really long way away, really, for Iran. And Iran is not interested in attacking the United States. Iran's only interest in the United States is they want the American troops out of the Middle East. They have no interest in trying to conquer the United States. That would make no sense. There's not even a remotely possibility of that. And nobody else would join in Iran in such a ridiculous project. The United States is far, far more powerful than Iran. On the other hand, Iran is far more powerful. It's probably in some ways more military capable than Pakistan. So there's no way that the United States is even considering invading Iran. That would be of the order of the Vietnam War. Because Iran is so much more capable than Iraq or Libya. It's not a war that could be over in a year. You're talking about a multi-years long war that would involve hundreds of thousands of American troops on the spot, probably at least 500,000, and probably more than that. Indeed, they mightn't have enough US troops in all the troops they have available without conscription to invade the United States, to invade Iran. Iran is about as big as Western Europe. And it's got population, a huge population. It's battle hardened. It's got terrain that is very difficult to invade, and it's very advanced in its weapons. It was able to shoot down an unarmed drone that flying very high, an ultra high level drone that even Pakistan can't shoot down, and Pakistan is regarded as very militarily capable. So there's no pushover either way, and it doesn't make sense, because Iran has been waiting for over a year for Biden. Iran was one of the foreign countries that very much wanted Biden to win. The reason being because of the Iran deal. And they want to return to the Iran deal. And Biden was one of the people involved in negotiating the Iran deal. So it's no wonder they want Biden to be president. And indeed, everyone the people involved in Europe and Russia and China, everyone except the United States wants to assume the Iran deal. So if Biden wants to, Iran wants to. So there's going to be these negotiations going on, because so much has happened since then. They probably can't just immediately snap back. But both sides will be negotiating, wanting to return to the Iran deal. And it makes no sense at all for Iran to do anything that would scupper that. Now, Iran is not a single thing. Just like you have the factions in the United States between the Democrats and the Republicans, you have factions in the Iranian parliament between the hardliners and the moderates, and then you have the president and you have the supreme leader, and they have different views from each other. So it's not a unified thing. But the moderates, who very much want to return to the Iran deal, are still pretty strong in Iranian politics. And they they have strong enough lead there that there's no way that they're going to just throw this all up. And nobody else wants it except Israel. Israel, for some reason, isn't very keen on the deal. And you should be aware, if you don't know already from my previous debunks, that Iran, along with Saudi Arabia, they are very keen on a nuclear-free Middle East. So Iran has basically been dragging its heels as it moves towards producing more nuclear fuel. It's kept very carefully on the civilian side, only doing things that would make sense with a civilian nuclear program. Everything it's done so far, it's just enriched the fuel to the level of normal civilian nuclear fuel at 4%, and even 20% that's still usable in a civilian program. So it's not military. It's not putting it's dragging its heels. It doesn't want to have nuclear weapons really, because its eye is on a nuclear-free Middle East. Also, the very moment that Iran seems to be about to produce a nuclear weapon, indeed probably even before its first nuclear test, certainly after it, then Saudi Arabia within a few weeks would have a nuclear weapon, because Saudi Arabia financed the nuclear program for Pakistan, and for sure has knowledge from that anyway, even if perhaps even direct aid, some kind of secret agreement. In any case, Saudi Arabia have said that they can get the nuclear weapon within a few weeks of Iran declaring that they're going to make one. And Iran doesn't want that. Iran and Saudi Arabia are long-term enemies. They're both Muslim, but they're different versions of the Muslim faith. And in the Middle East, the Sunni and the Shia Muslims don't get on very well with each other, although not politically. I'm not talking about the people, individual people, but on terms of politics. Although they do get on well in other countries, for instance in India. So Iran is not going to be best pleased if Saudi Arabia gets nuclear weapons, and both Saudi Arabia and Iran voted in favour of the treaty to ban all nuclear weapons, and they would join that treaty if it weren't for Israel. The only reason that they are even considering nuclear weapons is because Israel has a very large clandestine nuclear program. Israel was funded by Europe, and it was shared technology decades ago, and they are the only country in the world to have nuclear weapons to have never tested them, never officially tested them, and yet they're believed to have very capable nuclear weapons. There's one clandestine test which some people say is supposed to be South Africa test, but people say that the nuclear weapon was far too capable for it to be within South Africa's capabilities, and some people say that was an Israeli test that was done secretly. If so, just one test, and very advanced nuclear weapon. The reason was because Israel has all the test data from European nuclear tests, so it didn't need to do its own tests. And so Israel is believed to have a secret, undisclosed nuclear program where it's made its own nuclear weapons using the test data from Europe, from France, I think. And I can't remember which European countries. Not sure if the UK was involved. But there's a long-term association with Israel and the Jews, and they supported them with their quest to produce nuclear weapons. And then this is completely secret, but it's an open secret. And by keeping it secret, they don't let the international inspectors inspect their nuclear arsenal. And so this is quite scary for the Muslim countries in the Middle East, to know that Israel has this uninspected secret arsenal of nuclear weapons. And so that's why they're so very keen to stop this whole thing. They want Israel's weapons to be inspected, and they want Israel to get rid of its nuclear weapons. And until then, they don't feel safe in going nuclear free themselves. And that is really the background. It's not often explained as to why Iran is so keen to show itself as having the capability of developing a nuclear weapon, but at the same time it doesn't want to actually develop it. It's just a kind of argument to say, we are capable of developing a nuclear weapon, can we do something about Israel's nuclear weapons? That's basically their reasoning behind them trying to develop a nuclear weapon. They would have lost their aim for a nuclear-free Middle East if they ever actually produced one. So that's not often explained, but that's the kind of history behind all this. And so Iran wants to kind of edge towards a nuclear weapon, but not achieve it. At least that's what the moderates in Iran want to do. As I say, Iran does have these different factions and different views on the matter. But if you speak to the moderates, they don't want a nuclear weapon. They want Israel to get rid of its nuclear weapons. That's the basic plan behind all this. And so they want Biden they want to wait until they can negotiate with Biden. They want to return to the Iran deal. They want to be able to resume trade with Europe. Europe wants to resume trade with Iran. This is a multi-billion-dollar trade between Europe and Iran. For instance, a big export deal for exporting planes from Europe, from France I think it was, to Iran. And that just was stopped by Trump. When Trump, without any warning, left the Iran deal, and this plan to sell a multi-million-dollar deal to sell planes to Iran, which just had to be scrapped on the spot, because Trump, through the power of the United States dollar, was able to prevent any, was able to implement these sanctions against the will of Europe. Europe didn't want to sanction Iran, but they were forced to by the United States, who said you can't trade in dollars with Iran. And then they said that if any companies in Europe do trade with Iran, then they will cut off the trade with the United States. And most countries in Europe have much more trade with the United States than with Iran, so they basically had no choice but to stop trading with Iran. So that is how the United States, although they only have a few $100 million trade with Iran, but they were able to stop billions of dollars of trade between Iran and Europe, Russia, China, all their partners, through the leverage of the United States dollar. And so the end result of all this is that Europe isn't at all keen on what they never supported Trump. United Kingdom, where I live, never supported Trump's withdrawal, and the President Macron and how back then it was, what's her name? The Theresa May. They were trying to persuade Trump to stay within the deal, but he just left. So when Biden returns to the Iran deal, he's certainly going to be negotiating that, and there'll be a big hooray all the way around the world. There's hardly anyone, apart from Israel, who was happy with what Trump did. So in this whole thing, Iran are quick to anger, but they are they're very strategic and canny in how they reply, how they respond. They're very battle hardened. They've got very canny military commanders. They are not going to just do something out of spontaneously, just like the United States generals, who are not going to just do something without a military objective. Iran's not going to do anything without a military objective. Now, there is a little bit of complication here. Soleimani was the big kingpin for Iran, and it's through Soleimani that Iran kept control over the various Iran sympathizing militias in places like Iraq. So by killing Soleimani, they reduced Iran's influence on the Iran supporting militias in other parts of the Middle East. So as a result, it's rather harder for Iran to make sure that they show restraint. So if there is a risk, then it would be through that maybe some independent militia in Iraq who's not so impressed by the new leader Ghani. They don't have the same rapport with him. Whether they might do some rogue operation. So that would be a concern of Iran. And then Iran also has said they're concerned that Israel may do a false flag operation in Iraq to attack the Americans and claim it's Iran. And but they might, although that's what they're saying publicly, it might be that they're also concerned privately of a rogue operation that's not listening to their own commands as well. In any case, the situation is very complicated, and Trump is not going to, even if Trump ordered his generals certainly are not going to do some sudden response if anything does happen. You know, suppose some American soldier or something is killed in Iraq by a rocket attack by some Iraqi militias or something like that. You know, something happened that would be quite major, but there wouldn't be an immediate response. But whatever happens, if something does happen tomorrow, and let's hope nothing does happen, as I said, the American soldiers are going to be hunkered down and well protected tomorrow on the anniversary of that killing. So you can be sure they're watching out and very careful about anything that could happen. And I suppose the other possibility is some kind of domestic terrorism in the United States, you know, related to Iran, and again, but not under their command. And again, there'll be people looking out very carefully for things like that. And well, it is fine. It's right to be a little bit concerned about this, but don't be afraid. There's not going to be a war going to break out, and there's no possibility of a nuclear war. Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, and there's no way the United States is going to use nuclear weapons against Iran. That makes no sense. And if you look at the background of the whole situation, then everyone is sympathetic with Iran, unusually in this situation. Even Biden is. So, because Biden thinks Trump was wrong. The only one who isn't is Trump, but he's a lame duck president. And there's no way. Then just back to that thing, that some people think, oh well, Iran's going to use this as an excuse to get involved, to create martial law in the United States. That doesn't work. Martial law is used to quell something in the United States, like a riot or something. You don't invoke martial law, and especially the president, it's unclear whether he can invoke other types of martial law, but the only thing he can definitely invoke is the Insurrection Act. And the Insurrection Act is used to quell riots, and there are no ongoing riots in the United States, so it would be very difficult and be very controversial if he were to try to invoke that. And then people say, ah yes, but he's going to invoke the Insurrection Act, and he's going to use that to invade Congress. He can't do that. He's the executive branch, and the executive branch to use the soldiers to interfere with the legislative branch is absolutely impossible. And if he were to try, the officer would just refuse the command, because that's not within the range of capabilities of a president to order them to do that. Because their oath is to uphold the Constitution as well as follow the president, and the Constitution is way above the president. The Constitution is top, then the Congress next, and then the president below that. But everything that he does is the laws enacted by Congress as interpreted by the judiciary branch. So the Supreme Court also is above the president. And even his executive orders, they have to be interpreted by the Supreme Court. So there's no way that the president can do anything using the military, not in the United States. And it's a very long established principle since the Civil War. Shortly after the Civil War, there was a case that established very clearly that as long as you've got civil law then martial law is subsidiary to civil law in any situations where civil law applies. So there's just no way that Trump can do anything. When it comes to midday on January 20th, then the allegiance of all the officers in all the military in the United States switches from Trump to Biden. And it doesn't matter what Trump does in the next 3 weeks. I mean, if he did start a war, which he's not going to, then it'd be Biden. It would still switch to Biden on the midday of the 20th. It wouldn't achieve anything. And it is very much against. And Trump is also, even if you're very cynical about him, he's a businessman, and wars and his particular interests as a businessman are things like golf courses and hotels, and those don't do well in wars. So it's just completely consistent with his character and with what he does and what he represents, that he doesn't want to start wars. And that's what he said as a pledge, and that's been true all the way through. And he probably hasn't got the soundest military planning and military thinking, but he can only command generals, and generals have very sound military planning and understanding and thinking. And they are, as they put it, they're not shrinking violet, they're not shy people. If you are a general, then you don't say, "Oh, the president told me to do that. Well, what should I do?" And they don't. They're very, very determined, strong, careful. They know exactly, and they have authority coming from long experience. And a military general would be very firm if a president was to order him to do something that is against the 4 principles of armed warfare, international principles. There's no way they're going to do that. Drilled into them all the way through their career, all the way up to a general. So, and every officer is that drilled in, and generals most of all their life. So all their career, all their adult life as a soldier, and then an officer, and then a general, different levels, and eventually a 5-star general. And then the president gives them an order. They've got all that behind them, and they will say, and then if it came to it, they would say, what's your legal justification? And they'll get their lawyers in, and Trump's side will get their lawyers in. So there's no way that just some random thing that Trump just wakes up tomorrow and says, "You've got to attack Iran." They're not going to do that. They're going to say, what's the military reason? What's the objective? What is it you want us to? What is it you actually want us to do? And if he says, "Well, I just want you to attack Iran because it's going to help with the Georgia runoff elections," which it wouldn't, of course, then they say, "That's not the military objective. Sorry, can you say a bit more? What is your military objective?" And that's how generals think. Whereas there's no way they're going to do anything with the election ploy, even if it made sense, but it doesn't. So I hope this has helped ease some of you a little bit. I'm doing this on special request to some people who have been getting scared about what's going to happen tomorrow. So, and do go to sleep and get a good night's rest. And nothing's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, there may be some incident, there may be a rocket attacks in Baghdad or something, but there's not going to be a war tomorrow. And so anyway, I hope this helps some of you to sleep easy tomorrow, and to just bear in mind that it's not Trump, it's generals who are in the end responsible. And these generals in the United States, they're very well trained, careful people. They are not people who do sudden rash things, and in particular, they're not going to do things that have a serious risk, not proportionate to the military aim, of harm to civilians. And if you're a civilian, then you're concerned about the harm to you of whatever they might decide tomorrow if anything happens. Well, they have the same thoughts in their mind, and they have the military understanding of a general. as to what is risky and what isn't. And in this situation, I don't see them doing anything. They'll be saying, well, whatever happens, we've got some weeks to sort it out. Trump is the outgoing named up president. We need to know what Biden's views are on this. So I think that's how a general's going to be thinking too. So it would just be like the attack of Soleimani on the 3rd of January, and it took some weeks, I think, before the Iranians decided what they're going to do in return, and then they did this token attack. And the Iranians did a very impressive pinpoint attack on a shed full of spare parts for planes. They knew that the soldiers were all in their shelters, they knew where the shelters were, and they did a pinpoint, very precise attack right into the middle. You look at it, you can see the photographs taken up from above. It's a pinpoint direct into the middle of that building. It was a pinpoint attack on a shed full of aircraft parts. They didn't even attack the aircraft themselves, just a shed full of parts. And that was clearly just to say, look, we can do very precise attacks. We could have done much more than that. And the United States couldn't stop it. That's really quite impressive. That the Iranians did this long-range missile attack and attacked a shed full of aircraft parts, and the Americans couldn't stop them from doing that. But obviously the target itself was just symbolic, and they were just saying, look, we can do this, and look, we've got much more precise ballistic missiles than you thought we had. And that's basically what they were doing. They're just sending a message. They weren't trying to really retaliate with Soleimani. So if they do anything tomorrow on the 3rd, and if it's actually the Iranians who do it, then, I mean, even if, so you could imagine, I don't think this is likely, but the Iranians, they're most, if they really want to do something very sort of out there and quite provocative, then they might fire a ballistic missile and destroy another shed full of aircraft parts. That's the sort of thing they might do. But I can't see them doing that, especially with Biden coming along so soon. So, something to show their capabilities, but without provoking the Americans, and without scuppering the possibility of returning to the Iran deal. I think whatever they do, if they do anything, it would be symbolic, and it would be carefully calibrated to leave open returning to the Iran deal, because certainly the moderates in the Iranian parliament would not want to do anything to scupper the Iran deal. And so I've got a few quotes here I can read up. So first of all, Biden's manifesto, you can read it, I'll put the link in the video description. So Biden talks about the historic Iran deal. This is no surprise. He says if Tehran returns to compliance with the deal, President Biden would re-enter the agreement using hard-nosed diplomacy and support from our allies to strengthen and extend it, and while more effectively pushing back against Iran's other stabilizing activities. So Biden wants to return to the deal, and the things within the Iran deal, the provisions within the Iran deal to deal with the possible breaches of the Iran deal. There's no need for Trump to leave it. And so Biden would be using those to look at whatever Iran has done since then. And Iran, everything is reversible, as I said. They're a long-term advocate for a nuclear-free Middle East. And on the assassination of a top Iranian nuclear scientist, then Rouhani said, and that's the president in Iran, this barbaric assassination shows that our enemies are in stressful weeks. They're talking about Israel, they're not the United States. They feel their pressure declining, the global situation changing, but Iran is smarter than to fall into the trap of the conspiracy set by the Zionists. So he's talking about Israel and their sympathizers. and he thinks that they are responsible for this the assassination that was a few weeks back of the top Iranian nuclear scientist. And he sees a quick return. He says that Iran and the US can both decide to announce they will return to conditions on January 20th, 2017. And the Supreme Leader Ayatollah al-Khamenei has a different view. He thinks that Iran will choose the path. He said Iran will choose the path of diffusing sanctions and overcoming them. So that's rather hard a line, sort of giving the message to Biden that we can survive no matter what sanctions you impose. I think the negotiations might be quite tough between Biden and Iran, but really Iran wants to return to the Iran deal, and I can't imagine that this whole diffusing sanctions thing is going to get in the way of the Iran deal if they find a way to return. And then Soleimani, I talked about Ghani, he said that he asked them not to attack the American bases for now. He's believed to have said that. And Trump pledges, and I've said all the rest of this. Oh, and this was just about how it's we don't risk World War III. That was absolutely impossible. There's no way. Iran is only interested in attacks, if any, ever, on the US interests in the Middle East, not the United States. They've got no, and there are many Iranians in the United States, and on a person-to-person level, the Iranian people are very friendly with United States people. There's lots of communication back and forth, and they very much like the American people. They make a big distinction between the American people and the American government. There's a lot of past friendship between the Iranian people and the American people. And so they don't want to attack their own citizens, and they don't want to attack the United States. They're very much distinctive that what they are concerned about is the US president's presence in the Middle East. And they basically think the US has no business being there. And so they would be perfectly happy if the United States left the Middle East altogether. And to some extent, Iran has been, the United States have been doing what Iran wanted by withdrawing personnel gradually from the Middle East because of Trump's he reduced the soldiers in Iraq, he reduced the soldiers in Syria. He basically did what Iran wanted of them in that respect. So in that way, Iran in a way, but if Trump hadn't withdrawn from the Iran deal, if he'd stayed within the Iran deal, I think Iran would have been rather happy with the way Trump played his hand, because he was very much removing American soldiers from influence in the area and reducing their influence in the Middle East. But Iran doesn't like what Trump did by withdrawing from the Iran deal. So, anyway, I've already done videos about all that, so I'll stop this at 40 minutes, that'll do. If any of you are good at fact-checking, then just shout out for Doomsday Debunk Group, and also if any of you are experts on these things, do come and help out with scared people. And if you're scared, then do join the group. Be sure to read the rules at the head of the group before you post or comment. If you're just reading, you don't need to worry about the rules, but if you're going to take part in the group, then the rules are very important. They're how the group is able to function smoothly. Right, I'll stop this and upload it.